you end up going to UC Berkeley, where I went to school as well. Although
Yes,
you went a few years before me. Go Bears. And you got a finance degree there.
I did. In fact, when sophomore year, that's when we won the big game at Stanford, where we ran through the tuba player. So I was able to witness that live in the Stanford Stadium.
Okay. And then after you graduated, you became a stockbroker?
Yeah, not immediately after graduation, but within a few years, I ended up as a stockbroker. Yeah, I started working at Shearson Lehman in downtown Los Angeles.
Okay, and that's the Lehman Brothers?
Yeah, well, it was. I mean, Lehman Brothers merged with Shearson. It became Shearson Lehman Brothers. So by the time I worked there, they had already merged.
Okay, and then later on, Lehman Brothers was one of the casualties of
yes,
the financial
ironically,
collapse.
yeah, they went away after the 2008 financial crisis, which is something that I warned was coming for years. And in fact, had the people at Lehman Brothers followed my advice, they would have actually profited handsomely from that crisis, because instead of being long subprime mortgages, they would have been short, because I had been advocating that for years in some of my conferences, in the things that I was writing, in my book, my first book, The Crash Proof. I specifically warned about the housing bubble that the Federal Reserve had inflated in conjunction with bad government policy from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and I specifically identified the problem in the subprime mortgages, and was recommending my clients to short these mortgages. Eventually, the movie The Big Short was based on that trade. It wasn't based on me, but I made the same trade that the movie was about, and I was advocating that other people do it, and I was advocating it very publicly. So yeah, it's too bad that nobody at Lehman or Bear Stearns, because those are a couple of the firms that went away. And I used to work with Bear Stearns as well. I wasn't an employee, but when I first started my first broker dealer, I cleared with Bear Stearns. So I was working with both of those firms that ended up going under.
Right. Okay. So then in 1996, I guess you acquired an active brokerage firm and you named it Euro Pacific Capital?
Yeah, that's how it come. So I was working as an employee of Shearson Lehman as a stockbroker, account representative. And I didn't really like their investment strategy. I wasn't really happy with the culture of the firm that really was centered more just on, doing what was right short term for the company and for the institutional clients. And I was just working with retail, and I just didn't like the way my clients were being treated in that system. And so I just wanted to be my own broker so that I could pursue my clients' interests as best I could. And so I just kind of wanted to go independent. And I did something that it really is impossible to do today for somebody in my circumstances. And I started my own broker dealer. And the reason I'm saying it's no longer possible is because the regulatory burden has been so substantially increased since then. I mean, there was a lot of new regulation after 9/11, when we got the Patriot Act, and then we got anti-money laundering and all this stuff. And then after the financial crisis, more and more regulation. So I would need millions and millions of dollars to start my firm today. I didn't have all that money back then, but I was able to start it. And it's unfortunate that the government has made it impossible for people to do today what I did back in 1996.
Well, I mean, today, Euro Pacific Capital has a bunch of different offices across the U.S.?
Well, what happened around the time I moved to Puerto Rico, I ended up selling Euro Pacific Capital. And so the company was renamed Alliance Global Partners by the new buyers. And one of the reasons I sold it, apart from the fact that I was moving to Puerto Rico and I didn't really want to hold on to a US-based business living in Puerto Rico, but I really needed more economies of scale, because the regulatory burden had been growing so dramatically over the years that in order for the broker-dealer to really be profitable, it needed to be much bigger. And I just didn't have the time to grow the business to the scale that it needed to be in order to meet all the government rules and regulations. I mean, the government has put so many small brokerage firms out of business because they make it impossible to stay in business because you don't have the scale to afford all the compliance. So these guys bought it from me, and now they ramped it up and they hired a lot of people and they're doing a lot of investment banking. And so they're big enough to afford the compliance. And so I still kind of left the Euro-Pacific brand over there as a division of Alliance Global Partners. And I'm affiliated with that division in that I am managing investment strategies for that division from my Puerto Rican company, which is Euro-Pacific Asset Management. That company is based in Puerto Rico. It was initially started in Southern California, Newport Beach. And in 2014, I relocated the entire business and all the employees to Puerto Rico. And a few years later, I joined them in Puerto Rico. And, I've been living here full time since January of 2017. And I also manage a family of mutual funds, Euro-Pacific Fund family, from this asset management company here in Puerto Rico.
Well, at one point you started a Euro-Pacific Bank.
Yeah, I still have Euro-Pacific Bank, but I have a problem with the bank, and so I'm in the process of really transitioning it because there was a television network and newspaper out of Australia that accused the bank of doing a lot of bad things, and all the allegations were completely false. There wasn't a kernel of truth to anything that they wrote or anything that they said, but the mere allegations have created a huge problem for me in that business because of the regulatory environment that we're in. Just being accused of money laundering is enough that people can't work with you because now they're worried about their own compliance and being accused of working with a money launderer or somebody that's helping others to, evade taxes or, traffic in narcotics or whatever these crazy allegations were. So, yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that that article came out. I mean, I will be, getting my my defamation suit filed against that company. So yeah, that's moving forward, but that'll probably take a couple of years to play out in the Australian court system.
Let's talk about this for a second, because starting your own bank, that seems like such a monumental task from someone like myself that knows very little about this. You actually started your own bank. Like, how much is really required to start your own bank?
Well, you got to be pretty foolish actually to start one. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't be that difficult. But again, it's government, it's the regulation that makes it difficult. I have to spend millions of dollars a year on compliance. More than half of the bank's employees are just compliance, right? Basically doing work for the government, not doing work for me. The minute you have a bank, now you're, in involuntary servitude, and most of the work you do is on behalf of the government. It's not on behalf of the bank, and it's not on behalf of your customers. So I would not recommend that anybody get into that business. The brokerage business is not quite as bad, but it's got that in it. I mean, it was much better to be in the brokerage industry when I first started. It's very difficult. I mean, the government is screwing everything up as they're taking away all of our freedoms and all of our liberties. They are loading up American businesses with all sorts of costs. I mean, that's why the U.S. is so uncompetitive. That's why we have record trade deficits right now, because we can't produce, because the government has so increased the cost of production in the United States with burdensome regulation that we end up importing stuff that other people produce, and we run up these huge deficits. Eventually, the dollar is going to crash, I think sooner rather than later, and then we're not going to be able to buy anything. We're just going to be broke because everything is going to be too expensive to import, and we don't have the ability to produce it ourselves. And so Americans are going to see a very substantial decline in their standard of living.
Well, and I want to cover all that. That's very important. But I just want to kind of touch on Euro-Pacific Bank for a second, because you mentioned that there was a TV show called The Age Well, no, I get which is, I guess, the Australian version of 60 Minutes.
Yeah. Well, The Age.
And
The Age is a publication that's owned by the same company, Nine Media, whatever they're called, that also owns 60 Minutes Australia. And I'm not sure what affiliation 60 Minutes has, but 60 Minutes Australia may have with 60 Minutes the US. I mean, I don't know if they licensed the name, but it's a totally different company. It's not, CBS, the United States. But yeah, they're the ones that ran this article on me. And personally, I think the motivation, and I addressed all the allegations. You can watch my YouTube video. I put up a video. I think about 130,000 people have watched it. It's about a 90-minute response to those allegations. And so I think you just go on YouTube, Peter Schiff 60 Minutes, and you'll see it there. But I think that the reason that they did this is I think that 60 Minutes was working with the Australian government to try to create some public outrage and demand for more regulation on Australian banks, on Australian lawyers, on Australian professionals. And in order to do that, they wanted to create this fiction that Euro Pacific Bank was this bad bank, because we were doing business with a lot of reputable companies in Australia. And they were trying to say, hey, all these reputable companies are doing business with this shady bank that's doing all this bad stuff. We need more regulation in Australia to prevent this from happening. Except Euro Pacific Bank wasn't a shady bank. We weren't doing any of the bad things that they accused us of doing. They just made it up in order to advance this political agenda in Australia. And they figured, well, who's this guy, Peter Schiff? I mean, he's not going to sue us. We can say whatever I want. He's all the way over there in Puerto Rico. And so we could use him. We could sacrifice his brand and his company to advance, this political agenda in Australia and, maybe make some money, from our production. But, they underestimated my resolve. And maybe they even underestimated how much damage financially their false allegations would end up doing to the bank.
Well, I mean, according, to this article that I guess got put out on October 18, 2020, The Age said that Euro Pacific Bank became the target of the Operation Atlantis, the world's largest tax evasion probe.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, that's not true. I mean, we've never been a target of anything. I'm not even sure who the target of Atlantis is, that investigation. In fact, The Age, I think 60 Minutes, said that they weren't told who the target was. They guessed that it was me. Now, or they guessed it was my bank. Now, I don't know based on what information they guessed that. But, they didn't just, allege that we were the target. They said that we were the primary target, that the whole investigation basically was built around the bank, and that they basically said the bank was guilty, and they made all these false allegations. But I go into all the allegations that they made and why they were false in my video response. So I would suggest if anybody is really interested in that, they could kind of listen to that because it's already up there on the internet.